The Last Leaf, 36 extraordinary interviews with the final survivors who lived and breathed history. Read about the last Civil War widows, alive almost 150 years after the war. Meet the final pitcher, he was just a rookie, to surrender a home run to the mighty Babe Ruth. Hear from the last living person to have flown with the daring Amelia Earhart. Author Stuart Lutz traveled across the country in his 12-year quest to meet these rare final eyewitnesses. They are the last living survivors who have experienced some of the most tragic, heroic, important, and transformative events in modern American history. In The Last Leaf, their stories are eloquently told in their own passionate words, and Lutz blends their tales with background information in a lively narrative. Hear about the last Iwo Jima flag raiser, a young Marine who scaled Mount Suribachi to plant Old Glory at the top. Learn about the final eyewitness to the first electronic television broadcast in 1927. Read about the last survivor of the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire who fled to the building's roof to escape the flames. Meet the great magician Harry Houdini's final stage assistant. Learn how the last ground crewman below the Hindenburg escaped when it exploded. Hear about Thomas Edison's final living employee who quit college to work for the genius. And America's last World War I soldier, alive almost a century after the war. In The Last Leaf, these amazing and important tales of bravery, risk, innovation, loss, and humor all come to life. The Last Leaf, published by Prometheus Books in March 2010. For more information, go to thelastleaf.com.
Hi, my name is Stuart Lutz. I'm the author of The Last Leaf, which is an oral history book. Contains 39 chapters of anybody who's a last survivor or final eyewitness to great history. Some of the chapters in the book include the last Civil War widows. These were the last women who were married to Civil War soldiers. So they include Gertrude Janeway up here, who was the last Union widow. She died in 2003, and every single month she got a $70 check in her mailbox for her husband's service from the 1860s. Over on the other side is Alberta Martin, who died in 2004, who was the next to last Confederate widow. And this one here, Maudie Hopkins of Lexa, Arkansas, was the last Confederate widow who died in the year 2008. I will go into their stories a little bit later, and you can understand why women were alive who were married to Civil War soldiers about 150 years after the war. Here they are, their marriage photos. This is the last Union widow when she was about 18, and she got married in 1927. It's hand-tinted. They did not have color photography then. And the wedding photo of the last Confederate widow with her husband, who was also octogenarian. They got married in the 1930s also. Not looking like the world's happiest couple, I have to say, seeing that. One of the other people I also interviewed was Frank Buckles, America's last World War I soldier. There's a photograph of him as a doughboy in 1917 when he enlisted, and a photograph of him at about age 108. You can see the little medal that the French government gave him on his blazer right there. Now, today is Veterans Day. It's the 94th anniversary of the end of World War I, so I think we should take at least a moment to think about the service that these 4.3 million Americans did have, often which was quite brutal. Anybody been to the Vietnam War Memorial in D.C.? Know how many names there are on there?
Too many.
True, but specifically in terms of numbers, anybody? 58,000 names from 1959 to 1975. We got into World War I in April 1917. The first troops really didn't arrive there until the autumn, and it was over in November 1918. We were essentially in Europe for 1 year with World War I. Anybody want to guess how many Americans were killed in World War I?
Minute 8.
No, 117,000. If you doubled the size of the Vietnam Wall in 1 year, that's how many Americans were killed in World War I. So Frank Buckles was the last one. He petitioned the government to be buried at Arlington when he died. He was not eligible, but President Bush signed an executive order allowing him there. So he died at age 110 last year. The remarkable thing was he was born 111 years after George Washington was inaugurated and lived for 110 years. So he lived through half the existence of the federal government. So one day last year, I hopped in my car early in the morning, drove down to Arlington, waited out in the rain for about 2 or 3 hours, and got a picture of the horse-drawn caisson and his casket there. I was not invited to this part, but both the president and vice president did show up to pay their respects to the family. The last story I'm going to do is Paul Hopkins, the last pitcher to surrender a home run to Babe Ruth in the 1927 season when Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs. In 1919, Babe Ruth hit 29 home runs. The next year, he hit 54 home runs. In 1927, he hit 60 home runs, a record that lasted until 1961 when Roger Maris hit 61 home runs. For every home run, there is a poor pitcher victimized by the Sultan of SWAT, including Mr. Hopkins. He was a student at Colgate on the baseball team. He was signed for $4,000 to the New Haven Profs. He was pitching in New Haven, got scouted by the great Walter Johnson, perhaps the greatest pitcher of all time, and he was called up by the Washington Senators in September 1927. And there's Ruth in his prime form. On September 29th, Babe Ruth hit home run number 58 off of Horace Lisenby. Later that day, Paul Hopkins had never appeared in a major league game. In the 5th inning, is called in with the bases loaded and a certain person at bat. He tried to sneak a few curveballs by Babe Ruth, which did not work. Babe Ruth quickly deposited a pitch in the stands, grand slam, home run number 59 that year. When I met Mr. Hopkins, who was well in his 90s, he got up and still did his pitching motion for me. He did the Babe Ruth swing for me. He was still limber and loved it. The next day, Babe Ruth hit home run number 60 off of his teammate Tom Zachary, a record that stood for 34 years. Mr. Hopkins hurt his arm, putted around the majors, and finished with a record of 1 win and 1 loss and a 2.96 earned run average. He worked as a bank manager for many years. In 1998, he was invited to throw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium. It was the 50th anniversary of Babe Ruth's death. He was the last connection to that great year, so Steinbrenner called him up and invited him, and he went to Yankee Stadium and threw out the first pitch. He was well into his 90s at that point. And he did that, and that's how I found him. So when I went, he signed a couple baseballs for me, pitched 59th home run of Babe Ruth, September 29th, 1927, and signed the baseball. There's a picture of him in his younger days, and he signed a postcard for me as an older man. And this is the box score from the day. If you look, you can see Babe Ruth hit 2 home runs, and Paul Hopkins was one of the pitchers, and the Senators lost 15-4.